The metallic sound of his breathing echoed through the void as Vader fell to his knees, the remains of his mask revealing an inflamed eye filled with hatred. Obi-Wan, his lightsaber still lit, stared at him sadly. "I am not your failure, Obi-Wan," said the former apprentice. Vader tried to stand, but the pain from his damaged armor and the weight of defeat were overwhelming. "You didn't kill Anakin, I did," he said with a trembling voice. Obi-Wan just shook his head, turned off his lightsaber, and left, leaving him consumed by hatred and humiliation. The return to his fortress was silent. Each step was a reminder of defeat. Each noise from his mechanical breathing seemed to mock his helplessness. He knew that, even more powerful and experienced, his suit limited him. Without it, he would already be dead, but with it, he would never reach the fullness of his powers. "Why does the Emperor keep me like this?" he muttered, staring at the droids repairing his armor. "Does he fear what I could be?" The doubt turned into a flame of rebellion against his dark master. As he meditated in his chamber, flashes of the duel against Obi-Wan returned to his mind. He remembered the moment when the blue blade cut open his mask and his breathing became torturous. There he realized that he was nothing more than a walking prison, a puppet encased in iron. "I could have won if it weren't for this shell," he said, striking the metal wall with the force. Hatred grew, but with it came a spark of cunning. Perhaps it was time to turn his limitation into a weapon against the Emperor himself. Vader began to gather his most loyal scientists, demanding advances in his armor. Projects to increase mobility, amplify force conduction, and even attempts to eliminate part of the life support were tested. But no result satisfied him. There was always the feeling of being held in invisible chains. One of the scientists, fearful, commented, "Lord Vader, there is another possibility. We can clone a healthy body from your DNA, free from physical limitations." Vader turned slowly, his burning gaze piercing through the broken mask. "Continue," he ordered. The idea fascinated him. A new body, vigorous, without burns, without scars, without chains. But that wasn't all he wanted. It wasn't enough to create a clone. He needed to mold it to his will, as a perfect reflection of himself with no room for betrayal. Then he remembered the clones controlled by inhibitor chips. "If it worked for them, it will work for me," he muttered. "A new Anakin, but under my absolute control." The promise sounded almost like an echo of what he had lost. The decision was made. The secret laboratories on Mustafar began to work incessantly. Vader demanded daily updates, pressuring scientists to push beyond the limits of known science. He stared at the cloning tanks, remembering his youth and everything he had lost. "This time, there will be no mistakes," he said. "This new body will know no pain, only power." The thought intoxicated him. Perhaps it was not just a copy, but the future of his very essence. Meanwhile, the Emperor's shadow loomed over him. Sidious was no fool. He sensed disturbances in the Force, small cracks in the control he exercised over his apprentice. "Lord Vader seems restless," he commented in a low voice, alone in his chamber. He knew that hatred could strengthen, but it could also breed rebellion. The Emperor already suspected that Vader sought something more than just obedience. However, he believed he still had a firm grip on the reins. He wouldn't dare. Not yet, he thought, overly confident in his manipulation. On long nights, Vader stared at his distorted reflection in the glass of the cloning chambers. Every now and then, images of young Anakin came to mind. The boy from Tatooine, the hero of the Republic, the invincible Jedi Knight. Now he could rebuild that image, molding it into flesh and blood. "A new beginning, under my command." His voice echoed through the laboratory, making the scientists shudder. The clone would not just be a project, it would be the tool he would use to rewrite his destiny. The memory of Obi-Wan's words haunted him. "I'm sorry, Anakin." To Vader, those words sounded like a taunt. If he had failed, it would be by his own choice, not because of his former master. "I will create something greater than you ever imagined, Obi-Wan," he said in a fit of rage. He saw the clone as his answer to defeat, the embodiment of a future that had been denied him. A future in which no one would ever call him a failure again. But not everything was certain in his corrupted heart. In rare moments of silence, when the Force whispered beyond the noise of the machines, he still felt the shadow of Anakin Skywalker within him. What if this clone is stronger than me? He wondered. What if, by creating him, I am replaced? This doubt was his greatest torment, but it was also what drove him to reinforce his decision to implant the inhibitor chip. He will never be free. He will only be my extension. The project was secretly named Chosen One. Only the most loyal technicians had access to it, and they all lived in terror of the possibility of failure. Vader did not accept mistakes. Every failure in the experiments was punished with swift executions, further fueling the climate of terror. Fear was the engine that drove the work. Perfection is not a choice. It is an order, he declared. And so, little by little, the figure of a new body began to take shape inside the cloning tanks. As he watched the first signs of development, Vader placed his gloved hand on the glass. You will be what I could not be. Without pain, without chains, only power. The hiss of mechanical breathing mingled with the bubbling of the liquid in the tank. His eyes burned with expectation and vengeance. There, in the heart of Mustafar, a plan was born that would change the fate of the galaxy. A new Anakin, controlled by an inhibitor chip, ready to serve as Darth Vader's ultimate weapon. Before the clone was ready to be seen, the maturation process was carefully controlled. Inside the incubator, the body grew at an accelerated rate, weeks equating to years of development. Tissues formed, muscles strengthened, and the features of a young man began to emerge rapidly. Vader watched each stage closely, like a sculptor shaping his masterpiece, while scientists adjusted the parameters so that nothing would get out of control. The laboratory on Mustafar was plunged into silence, only the bubbling of the tank and the humming of the machines filling the air. Vader stood motionless before the glass, watching the features begin to emerge. Gradually, the lines of the face took shape, and what he saw left him speechless. It was not the deformed face of Darth Vader, but the young face of Anakin Skywalker, as he had been before the flames. For a moment, time seemed to recede, and the cold gaze behind the mask trembled at the almost ghostly sight. "It's me, again," he murmured, his mechanical breathing marking the weight of the revelation. The scientists approached with preliminary data, reporting on the genetic stability of the body. "Lord Vader, the midichlorian count is identical to yours. A perfect reflection with no detectable flaws," said one of them, trembling with fear. Vader leaned over the record table, analyzing every detail. The Force vibrated around the tank, as if recognizing what was being gestated. "A perfect clone," he declared, almost reverently. For the first time in years, he found himself free of the scars that imprisoned him. When the body was finally removed from the tank, the image before Vader was disturbing. Lying in the medical chamber, the clone appeared to be asleep, but his breathing was steady, natural, without the metallic wheeze that accompanied every movement of the Sith Lord. When he opened his eyes for the first time, he stared directly at Vader, without blinking. There was no emotion, no surprise, just cold obedience. Vader approached and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The clone replied immediately, without hesitation, "I am Anakin Skywalker. Your command is my will." Tests began immediately. The clone demonstrated precise reflexes, balanced strength, and quick thinking. He answered questions without delay, always directly, like a sharp machine molded in flesh. Vader watched each response, assessing whether loyalty was truly assured. The inhibitor chip seemed to work, making the new Anakin a perfect soldier, incapable of questioning or hesitating. "Excellent," Vader commented, slowly spinning the saber in his hands. "You are more than I expected. A shadow that moves as I command." As the days passed, the scientists reinforced the tests, testing physical and cognitive limits. The clone showed no signs of fatigue or doubt. Each order was carried out with surgical precision. Each command answered in an impassive tone. Vader saw in him the ultimate tool, the weapon that would overcome any weakness. He no longer had to fear the weight of his armor or the chains imposed by the Emperor. Now he had before him a reflection of his former glory, young and intact, but completely submissive. In one of the final tests, Vader stood motionless in front of the clone, watching him silently. He remembered his youth, the hero he had been in the Republic, but this reflection did not smile, did not dream, did not question. It only obeyed. It was Anakin without humanity, molded to be a tool of war. "Perfect," Vader repeated, satisfied. He touched the clone's shoulder and said, "Soon, you will see what you were created for." The scientists exchanged nervous glances, knowing that the next phase would be decisive. Silence returned to the laboratory, broken only by Vader's mechanical breathing and the sound of the equipment. The clone remained motionless, awaiting the next order, as if fate itself had frozen time. Vader knew that this moment marked a point of no return. What stood before him was not just an experiment, but the key to rewriting the future of the galaxy. He slowly walked away, his black cape dragging across the floor, as he muttered, "Now, the training begins." The laboratory was no longer enough to contain the advance of the new Anakin. Vader took him to the dark corridors of his fortress, where the lava reflected like a distorted mirror of the anger he carried. "From today onwards, you will be my apprentice," he said, raising the red saber before him. The clone merely bowed his head without protest. For Vader, there was no room for doubt. The ancient rule of the Sith required two, a master and an apprentice, and here was his chance to finally shape the galaxy according to his vision. In the early days of training, Vader tested his clone's discipline. He demanded perfect movements, quick attacks, absolute mastery of every technique. The new Anakin performed everything flawlessly, every gesture calculated, every command obeyed without the slightest hesitation. Inside, Vader remembered when he had trained with Obi-Wan, but now there was a crucial difference. There were no arguments, no impulses, no questions. It was like teaching himself, but without the mistakes that had previously led him astray. The use of the Force was introduced soon after. Vader exposed him to exercises in telekinesis, perception, and manipulation of the surrounding energy. The clone responded with surprising naturalness, as if the Force were merely an extension of his muscles. Heavy objects floated effortlessly. Attacks were defended before they were even launched. "Perfect," said Vader, watching him crush a training droid without showing emotion. "You will be the weapon that destroys the Emperor." His voice carried as much ambition as it did fear. Months passed, and the tests became more brutal. Vader pitted him against dozens of soldiers at once, and none could defeat him. With each victory, there was no smile, only silence. He was a soulless warrior, but efficient beyond comparison. Vader realized, with some discomfort, that this young, healthy, scar-free body already surpassed in agility and strength everything he had been before Mustafar. "You are stronger than I was, when I was still whole," he admitted in a low voice. The scientists who survived the tests reported with amazement that the clone's connection to the Force seemed to grow exponentially. With no emotions to distract him, no pain from the past, he channeled all his power in a pure and devastating way. For Vader, this confirmed his decision. He had created something that could challenge Sidious's throne. The clone, named by Vader simply as Anakin, was no longer treated as a mere experiment, but as an official apprentice. The two traveled across distant galaxies, hunting rebels and surviving Jedi, testing the limits of the new body. Vader always maintained control, reminding him of the submission imposed by the chip. "You live to serve me," he would say, as he watched the clone carry out orders with deadly precision. But with each passing day, the Force seemed to recognize more intensely that this being was truly chosen, which unsettled even the Master himself. In long training sessions, lightsabers clashed violently. Vader's against Anakin's illuminated the dark rooms of the fortress. Vader noticed the impossible speed, the reflexes that surpassed even his own in his glory days. At times, the Sith Lord had to use his cunning to avoid being disarmed by his own apprentice. "Remember," "Without me you don't exist," he roared, trying to impose his authority. But Anakin responded only with silence and blind obedience. Vader began to harbor a mixture of pride and unease. His plan to create a perfect weapon had worked, but he already felt the weight of being faced with something he did not completely control. The chip was his guarantee, but the Force was treacherous, and no one could predict what such a powerful being would do if it broke free. Still, Vader stifled these doubts. "The Emperor will fall, and when he does, we will rule side by side," he declared. Meanwhile, rumors reached Sidious's ears. He sensed disturbances in the Force, echoes of power that could not be ignored. "Lord Vader is hiding something from me," he murmured on his dark throne on Coruscant. "But everything born of shadows must sooner or later be revealed." The Emperor waited, certain that his apprentice's betrayal would come, and eager to crush any challenge that dared to stand before him. In the halls of his fortress, Vader and Anakin prepared for the final confrontation. The apprentice had already mastered techniques that even the ancient Sith records had deemed lost. Force lightning, mind manipulation, control of enemy movements, everything flowed naturally. Vader watched, recognizing that he had succeeded in creating the perfect warrior. "The time is near," he said to the clone, watching the fire from the rivers of lava reflect off his mask. "The throne will be ours." Anakin, motionless, replied only, "Your command is my will." Vader stared at him, hiding a sigh of satisfaction behind his mask. He was ready to face the destiny that had pursued him since Mustafar. He was no longer just the Emperor's wounded servant, but the master of a renewed power. In the silence, he felt the Force pulsing, as if the universe itself awaited the approaching outcome. And then, in the darkness of his fortress, Vader raised his red lightsaber and declared, "The great moment has come." The throne room on Coruscant was plunged into shadow, lit only by the cold glare of artificial lightning flashing across the enormous windows. Palpatine waited seated, his piercing gaze hidden beneath his hood. The sound of Vader's metallic footsteps echoed across the marble floor, and behind him came a hooded prisoner, his hands bound by magnetic cuffs. "My master," said Vader, bowing his head. "I bring you a gift." The Emperor narrowed his eyes curiously, sensing a strange vibration in the Force that aroused his instinct of suspicion. Vader stopped a few feet from the throne and, with a slow, ceremonious gesture, pulled back the hood that hid the prisoner's face. The silence in the room was broken by the sharp sound of the Emperor's breathing. Before him was the young face of Anakin Skywalker, unblemished, as it had been before the flames of Mustafar. "Impossible," murmured Sidious, leaning back slightly in his chair. His yellow eyes widened, and for the first time in years, fear was etched on his wrinkled face. "What is this, Lord Vader? What sorcery dare you bring me?" Anakin raised his eyes, cold and relentless. With a subtle movement of the Force, the mechanisms that held his shackles twisted and exploded in sparks, freeing his hands. The scientists watching from a distance looked at each other in panic, but there was no time to react. In one leap, Anakin pulled the red saber from his waist and ignited it, the crimson glow reflecting off the Emperor's terrified face. "It's not witchcraft," he said in a firm voice. "It's your end." Sidious reacted quickly, raising his own saber and spinning toward the perfect clone's attack. The clash of blades lit up the hall, sparks cutting through the air like thunder. Vader stood motionless, watching with satisfaction the duel he had always wanted to witness. The young and powerful Anakin against the master who had kept him in chains. Anakin's speed was overwhelming, his blows firm, without hesitation. Sidious defended as best he could, but each attack was stronger, until, in one decisive move, Anakin's red saber severed the Emperor's right hand. A cry of pain echoed through the hall, but it was soon replaced by Sidious's distorted laughter as he raised his left hand and unleashed a whirlwind of blue lightning bolts. The electric beams crossed the air toward Anakin, lighting up the floor with explosions. The perfect clone, however, did not retreat. He turned off his saber and raised both hands, absorbing the energy as if it were part of him. The lightning reflected in his eyes, which remained cold and unshaken. "This will not destroy me," he said, advancing step by step against the Emperor's attack. Sidious tried to intensify the lightning bolts, but Anakin, with a roar, lifted the old man's frail body with the Force. Bones began to creak, first discreetly, then in horrendous cracks that echoed through the hall. The Emperor writhed, screaming in agony, until one last crack broke his spine. The body fell limp, its glassy gaze fixed on nothingness. The throne of the Empire was empty. Vader advanced slowly and stared at the corpse of his former master. "Thus ends the reign of Sidious," he declared, his voice thick with triumph. At that moment, Vader rose imposingly before the throne and said, "From now on, I will finally rule the galaxy, but not alone." Anakin, at his side, cleaned his lightsaber and tucked it into his belt. "You will be my squire, my blade, and my shield," Vader continued. The clone bowed his head in submission, as he had been programmed to do. "Your command is my will," he replied. And so master and apprentice sealed the fate of the Empire, now under a new, cruel, and unbreakable order. With Anakin at his side, Vader embarked on an unprecedented campaign. Together, they subjugated entire systems, crushing any planet that dared to resist. The red of their lightsabers became the last flash seen by rebel leaders before they were eliminated. "No world will rise against us," Vader said, as the galaxy plunged deeper into fear. Anakin always remained by his side, silent and deadly, a perfect reflection of what the Sith Lord had always wanted to be. The hunt for rebels intensified. Cells hidden on distant moons were wiped out. Makeshift fortresses burned under the combined power of master and apprentice. Planets that refused to bow down were forced by the iron fist of the new empire. The alliance between Vader and his clone was unbeatable. Together, they spread terror, destroying any hope that still lingered in the farthest corners of the galaxy. "They cannot hide," Vader would say, and Anakin carried out each order with lethal precision. Still, the Force whispered strangely. Vader realized that each victory reinforced the destiny he had chosen, but he also sensed something silent in the clone's actions. He was perfect, but empty, a soulless reflection, incapable of doubt or hesitation. And that made him even more dangerous, for nothing but order mattered. "You are the weapon I have always needed," Vader would say, while fearing the consequences of his own creation. The campaigns dragged on, and with each planet conquered, the new empire's rule became absolute. Surviving Jedi were hunted down and eliminated, rebels exterminated without mercy. Vader felt the weight of victory in his metal hands, finally free from Sidious' shadow. The throne was his, and at his side always remained Anakin's clone, the relentless guardian who maintained the balance of his reign. Together, they shaped the galaxy with iron and fear, without opposition to match. And then, amid the missions that were piling up, a new destination appeared on the horizon. Information indicated that a rebel cell was gaining strength on a planet forgotten by the major routes. Vader sent Anakin to destroy it like so many others, but upon receiving the reports, the Sith Lord's eyes flashed with surprise. The planet in question was Tatooine, and so, the perfect clone's new journey would take him back to the desert that had shaped Anakin Skywalker's childhood. As Anakin walked through the sands of Tatooine, something different began to awaken in his mind. Every corner of the desert, every rock, seemed to echo memories that were not just artificial memories. He saw images of pod races, his mother's gaze, and the nights when he dreamed of freedom. Little by little, the nightmares began. Shmi's death, the unbearable pain of losing her, and especially the memory of Padme. These were visions that burned in his mind and made him feel something he had never felt since he was created: emotion. One morning, while patrolling a nearby village, he saw a boy running through the sandy streets, laughing loudly. Right behind him, a woman shouted, "Luke Skywalker, come back here now." Anakin's heart froze. A chill ran up his stomach and spine. He didn't need explanations. The Force roared in the boy like a sun. The truth was inescapable. The son "Of Vader," he whispered, paralyzed. And when Beru Lars saw him up close, she gasped in shock. "Anakin!" The boy stopped, stared at the stranger, and frowned. "Why does he have the same name as my father?" he asked suspiciously. Beru's silence was enough to further increase the boy's doubt. "Is he my father?" Luke insisted, his eyes wide. Before anyone could answer, a new voice echoed across the sands. "Anakin!" It was Obi-Wan, emerging from the shadows. His eyes fixed on the clone and trembled with astonishment. Before him was the young face of his former apprentice, intact as it had been before Mustafar. Immediately, painful memories flooded Anakin's mind. The battle in the flames, the screams, and even the recent confrontation. Anakin instinctively activated his red lightsaber, still stunned by the shock. "It's impossible," Obi-Wan murmured, his eyes watering. Luke, innocent, ran to Anakin and hugged his leg. The unexpected gesture froze him in place. A flood of feelings washed over him. Tenderness, pain, love. And then, something unprecedented happened. A tear rolled down the clone's cheek. Anakin looked at Obi-Wan, turned off his lightsaber, and said in a trembling voice, "Master!" It was as if he had awakened from a deep trance. The inhibitor chip was no longer effective, crushed by the intensity of the force pulsing within him. Obi-Wan, his hand trembling, approached him in tears. "Anakin, is that you?" The Jedi opened his arms, ready to embrace him. In the next instant, a cold, metallic voice cut through the air. "Stand back, Obi-Wan." Vader emerged from the shadows, drawn by the disturbance in the force caused by the clone's nightmares. The mechanical sound of his breathing filled the air, and he raised his red lightsaber. "Obi-Wan," he said menacingly, before advancing with fury. Anakin shouted, "No!" and activated his own lightsaber, intercepting the blow. The two faced off in a brutal duel, red blades clashing, while Obi-Wan protected Luke from a distance. The combat was fierce, but the clone's youth and perfection prevailed. In the final moment, Vader fell to his knees, his breathing failing. Anakin raised his hand, unleashing a force lightning bolt directly at his former master's chest. "Your empire ends here," he declared, before the explosion of energy consumed every circuit in Vader's armor, leaving only silence. Obi-Wan, still shaken, approached and placed his hand on his shoulder. The clone was breathing heavily, but his eyes were now full of life. Back on the ship, Obi-Wan stared at him in silence until he spoke. "What do you intend to do now?" Anakin replied firmly, "I will return the galaxy to the people. The throne does not belong to me." Obi-Wan nodded proudly. Bail Organa, informed of what had happened, received them in the Senate and declared, "The time has come to hand back command. And also, it's time for him to meet her." Obi-Wan simply nodded in agreement. The trip to Alderaan was marked by silence and anticipation. Upon disembarking at the palace, Anakin was led to a brightly lit room where a young girl was waiting for them. Bail approached and, in a solemn voice, said, "Leia, this is your father, Anakin Skywalker." The girl stared at him with curiosity and suspicion, not fully understanding the weight of those words. Anakin, in turn, looked at her, then at Obi-Wan and murmured, "She has her eyes," referring to Padme. Obi-Wan smiled and replied, "Not just her eyes." Bail let out a soft laugh, and the tension in the room seemed to dissipate. Then something else unprecedented happened. The new Anakin smiled for the first time.